Hello, everyone. This is your 3-minute notice. We will begin the webinar shortly.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to today's webinar, the Millennial MGO, How to Be Successful When Everyone Sees You as Their Kid. My name is Tony Bell, and I'm a trainer for the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. I'll be your facilitator today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar, as well as a Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the chat box using your GoToWebinar control panel. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with the slide deck and recording to review again at your leisure. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. That's why we are here. At the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, our mission is to significantly increase your fundraising capabilities and the impact you have on your communities and society through a proven contemporary curriculum presented by world-class nonprofit leaders, best-in-class faculty, and renowned philanthropists. A quick shout out to our affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers nationally. Check out the map to find an institute in your community. If you're on social media, please give us a shout out using the hashtag #SIPWebinar. Now I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Nick Kulik. Nick Kulik, CFRE, is the Director of Development for the College of Engineering at the University of Toledo Foundation. He has led and participated in multiple annual, comprehensive, and capital campaigns with nonprofit, higher education, and healthcare organizations. He has been active within the fundraising community, supporting the growth of young professionals by serving as chair of the Association of Fundraising Professionals International Next Generation Committee, along with writing articles and speaking about young professional topics to organizations around the country. He is also the recipient of the AFP International Outstanding Young Professional Award and Pi Kappa Phi National Fraternity's 30 Under 30 Award. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Tony. I'm really excited to be here. Really excited to do this webinar. A couple months ago, I was in San Diego and had the opportunity to participate with some of the SIP chapters around the country. And I'm really glad that they invited me to come and have this conversation again about young professionals within our industry. So in this session, what I really want you to get out of it is learn what millennial fundraisers are thinking and feeling, how millennial fundraisers can overcome fears with donors, the multi-generational office, the map to your career, and then at the end, we're going to go over some of your thoughts and questions that you may have throughout this presentation. So before we get started, I'm really interested to know who's in the audience today. So we're going to do a quick poll where I want you to let me know, do you identify as a millennial? So the easy answers, yes or no. But some of you out there may think that you may be a millennial, so you may not be sure. So we'll see what people say. And then if for some reason there's another, we can add that in too. So we'll launch the poll here just in a sec.
A poll will launch on your screen in just a minute. You will have about 30 seconds to enter your response. As a reminder, if you do select other, please do let us know in the chat box what your response is. All right, you'll have about 30 seconds. All right, about 10 more seconds, and then we'll close the poll and launch the results on your screen. All right, let's take a look at the results.
Okay, Nick, let's see here. We have 55% of our attendees identify as a millennial, 40% said no, 3% said that they're not sure, and 2 are other. But I don't see what others are in the chat boxes just yet. But those are the results of our poll. So back to you, Nick.
Great, thanks, Tony. And thank you for everyone for participating in that poll. It's great to just know who we're talking to in the audience. So one of the things that we really focus in on is, what is a millennial? So for me, what I think is really important is identifying, what that person is. And for many of us, who that is. So when I think about a millennial, there's a lot of times where people come to me and say, Nick, a millennial is just a Starbucks drinking hipster who spends more time tweeting about their low-fat caramel macchiato than spending time at work, which obviously describes very few of the millennials that I know within the industry. So one of the things that we always like to do is identify what is a millennial. Now, I know there's a lot of different thoughts out there on what a millennial is, and so one of the things that I do is I use the Pew Research Center data. Now, notice that this is also acknowledging ages in 2018, so just add 1 year in so that you can see what the current ages would be. But according to the Pew Research Center, the millennials are ones born from 1981 to 1996. So this is really important for a variety of reasons. One, it'll let you know the type of people that I'm talking about throughout the rest of this presentation. But I think it's also good for the participants that are not millennials, or maybe you think that you're on the border of a millennial, and so you can see where maybe your age ranges fall within that. Now, why is this important? The reason why it's important is that there's going to be a large gap within the fundraising industry. So what we know from an industry perspective is that the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics says that there's going to be about 19,000 new jobs by 2026 within the industry. The other thing that we know from stats out there today is that baby boomers are retiring at a rate of 10,000 a day. So when you think about that and you think to yourself, well, we have this big influx of jobs coming by 2026, and we have a large number of the baby boomers who have been leading the industry for years now leaving, how are we going to fill that void? So that's where a lot of this conversation started with myself and a few other individuals. And we said, well, if we're going to prepare young professionals within the fundraising industry, we have to know what they're thinking and feeling. And so that was a big part of why myself, one of my colleagues, Dustin Williams, and another one, Emily Reed, worked together to start talking about how can we survey these young professionals. So through a partnership with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, we were able to survey over 100 young professionals to get their thoughts and feelings of where they are in the industry. Now, what I will tell you is that most of the people who responded to the survey at the time, and this was about a couple years ago, were trended towards the lower end of the millennial spectrum. So we're talking about 31 and younger were most of our recipients. So keep that in mind as we're reading this information. So some of the really interesting results that we got was that 81% of respondents felt anxious, nervous, or worried before meeting a donor for the first time because of their perceived lack of age or experience. 70% of these individuals also interact with seasoned fundraisers at their organization at least weekly, but surprisingly, 85% did not seek out advice from those seasoned fundraisers. So an interesting dynamic there where young fundraisers are interacting with seasoned fundraisers, but aren't asking for advice. Another interesting part that came out of this was when we asked, what types of communication are you most uncomfortable with? Now, to no surprise to many people, the phone was 65%. The other thing that I find really interesting, that in person was 21%. So if you look at that, about 86% of our young professionals in the industry right now have an uncomfortability with doing interpersonal communications with our donors, which many of you know that that's really the key to raising money is having those personal conversations with donors. Another part that was really interesting is we asked them to respond to career planning. So how far out are you looking as a young professional? And what was really fascinating is 81% are not planning beyond 5 years. So you're looking at a lot of people who are entering the career field right now looking for those next 5 years and what type of knowledge and experience that they want to gain. We also asked them, our survey responders, how does age impact your career? And this was really fascinating. We got some really interesting results. I'm only going to share a few with you now, but we heard a lot of that I really have to prove myself to obtain new projects and credibility. This one came up often, the perception that I'm cute or just an assistant when I've trained to be a professional and I'm hardworking. And then there are some positive ones like, the ability to be innovative and embrace technology. We know how the fundraising industry has really changed with the embrace of technology. Think of day of giving, online giving campaigns. And then many of the older board members view me in the regards of their kids. This actually was one of those responses that really drove our own presentation title, because we sat around a room and said a lot of us feel that way, where we feel like we're just someone's kid, even though we are a working professional within the fundraising industry. So one of the things we started coming up with is how can we help young professionals overcome fears in building relationships with donors? So we focused in on right now mastering the phone. And in mastering the phone, there's a lot of different things that someone can do, but here's just a few pointers for my young professional friends on the phone. So ask a colleague or mentor if they can listen in on your phone calls. I think this is critical. Getting feedback is one of the easiest ways you can learn to do something better, maybe to improve the style, maybe improve the tone when you're on the phone. So that can be a really impactful feedback. I have a plan for the phone conversation. We're going to go over a plan here in a minute, but I always go into a phone conversation knowing my plan and who I'm calling and what barriers there may be. Practice, practice, practice. If you're not on the phone, you're not able to practice, you can't get comfortable with mastering the phone. This one's a really good one, blocking off time on your calendar and then reward yourself for success. So many times our calendars really get away from us. So how do we make sure we have time and then reward ourselves when we say, yeah, we've done a really good job and we made the calls we wanted to make today. And then include phone calls in your metrics. What gets measured gets done. So if you put in your metrics, even if it's not measured by your supervisor, this could be a really powerful tool to mastering the phone. So here's some things to consider when you're making a call. This goes back to the plan that I was mentioning. So what type of call is it? Is it a stewardship call? Is it a qualification call? Are you soliciting someone? Are you scheduling a meeting? Know what it is going into it. Know who you're calling. Is this a grantor, a board member, a longtime donor, a new prospect? That's really important because the type of conversation you're going to have is going to change. And then what factors? And I think this is the one that we don't think enough about. So, certain professions, individuals are easier to get a hold of. If anyone has worked with raising money in the medical field, doctors can be hard to get a hold of. So you call doctors maybe early in the morning or late at night. Some other professions have that as well. Knowing who the gatekeepers may be, knowing how to have a conversation with a gatekeeper, all these things can be extremely important. So navigating prospect meetings. I think this is also important when we're looking at that in-person communication that we have with people, remembering that that's 21% of our respondents who felt uncomfortable with the in-person meeting. So always prepare for a meeting. Have the meeting purpose in mind. Why are you meeting with this donor? What are you trying to accomplish? What is it that you want them to know going into it? What is it that you're able to do to really make sure that it's impactful for you and then also make it impactful for the donor while also moving them towards a gift? So having these 3 questions in mind are things that I always think about before I go out on a donor visit. And then for those of you who are doing discovery work, here's a little plan that I have that you can take a look at. Now notice on the screen, you can download a handout on the webinar control panel. So you can download this and follow along with the slide itself. And I believe it's also gonna be sent to you later at the end of this presentation. So relate. That's the first part of the RITE discovery meeting that you need to have. How do you find commonalities between yourself and the donor? relating is key because you're starting to build that relationship. So you want to make sure you can find those commonalities. You want to invite them to ways to be involved with your organization. So be prepared. You may have some notes on the individual that you got from a previous fundraiser or that you found Googling the person. So what are some things that you could invite them to be involved in? The takeaway from the meeting is key. You always want to leave with a follow-up item because you want a reason to get back in touch with that individual. Now, a follow-up item could be a variety of things. It could be getting information that they had asked for. It could be connecting them to another person within the organization. It could be connecting them to a certain service that you provide. So what are those takeaways so you can continue the conversation? And then lastly, create an engagement plan. So after the meeting, you should always be thinking about what are the next steps. So in developing that engagement plan starts to create that real moves management where you can start to lay out how it is that you're going to engage that donor and move them towards a gift. Now, making the ask, when we get there, it's a variety of different ways that people make asks, and everyone has their own style. So I'm not going to go into the style part about making an ask, but here's a couple things that should be considered. Do you have the right Ps, the right prospect? So the person that is really interested in your organization, someone who has the affinity and the capacity to make a gift. The right project for that individual. So if someone tells you that they're really interested in a certain part of your organization, make sure you have a proposal for them that supports that project. And then the right person making the ask. And I think this is extremely important. There are certain individuals that the right person could be you. You could be the one making an ask. But there are some instances where having someone else with you is important. It may be the head of a program that your organization puts on. It could be the CEO or president of your organization, your executive director. Those sorts of people are really important. And then timing is critical. So you want to make sure that you're asking at the right time and you're not pushing. So in a lot of ways, this is where when someone may be going through a health issue and they tell you, hey, you know, I can't take this meeting right now, don't force the ask. Make sure to wait for a little while. Or if someone says, hey, my son's graduating from college, can we get back to you in a couple months? Sure, great. So make sure the timing is really important to this process and make sure you're on the right time for the donor. And then no's not the end of the conversation. And I think this is really important because a lot of people just stop with no when they really should be asking why. So going beyond that, the multi-generational office is also key. So how do you set the tone for your office? You know, I was saying before that the millennial within the office has that stereotype of not being there, not being around, tweeting on their phones. I get it, I've been there. And so how do you as a young professional set that tone? I would say one of the biggest parts is balance, flexibility, and professionalism. Now, this is where I tell people all the time. There's this old adage of saying that you need to have work-life balance. In my opinion, it's work-life integration. So you're able to balance that flexibility and professionalism, especially in a job like ours, where we're not 9-to-5 individuals. We are people that work late at night on weekends to accomplish events, to accomplish other tasks. So having that flexibility and professionalism is key, because if you're going to keep an odd schedule and if you're allowed to keep an irregular schedule at your office, make sure that it's professional and you're always answering emails and getting back to people in a timely manner. Treat your colleagues like donors. This is extremely important. And the reason why it's extremely important is that when we look at building relationships with donors, we also want to look at building relationships with the people within our organizations. So what we want to do is really look at our colleagues as donors and build that trust and build that relationship so that we're no longer the kid in the room, and what we are is another professional supporting the organization's mission. Confidence is key. Know what you're talking about. And I'm not saying that you have to be the expert at everything, but I think it's really important to really understand that you do know something. You may be really good at annual giving. You may be really good at social media campaigns. You may be a great major gift officer. So what is it that you're really good at? Have confidence in your skill set and understand that you know what you're talking about. I think a lot of the times young professionals really get into this habit of not feeling like they know the answers, even though they really do. So they're afraid to speak up in meetings, or they're afraid to give their opinion or their thoughts on a strategy. But if you have confidence, you can start building those pieces out with the rest of your team. Be raised with a compelling story of why you do what you do. I think this is really interesting. This is something that I've had conversations with other young fundraisers, with the idea of the overturn of employment and the fundraising industry right now. It's still roughly about 18 months, I believe, in nonprofit. It's ticked up a little bit in higher education, is now up to about 3 years. But if you have a compelling story for why you do what you do, it starts to eliminate someone's thoughts that you're just here for a short period of time until the next job opens up. So for me, working at a higher education institution, I tell people all the time that my dad was a first-generation college student. So I've seen the difference of how education impacts people's lives, and I want other people to be that first-generation college student. So that's why I do what I do, and that's why I think it's really important. But what is your story, and what is the story that you can tell to people within your office? I'll also tell you that I've used this with donors as well when they ask me about my compelling story, and it starts to really break down those barriers with the donors who have seen maybe you're the fourth fundraiser they've seen in 5 years, and it really starts to create that connection with that donor. And believe in your story. You have to believe in your own story, because credibility and authenticity is everything in our business. And if you don't believe in your own story, then people in your office aren't going to believe that you believe in the mission as well. I think another important piece is read. You have to read. You have to read the Chronicle of Philanthropy. You have to read things like Advancing Philanthropy. You have to read some of the materials, even with SIP. And I think that's really important. And not only read materials that are part of the fundraising industry, but read things outside of it. I like to read a lot of different news organizations. I got a lot of Google alerts that I use. And then I also like to read a lot of autobiographies of other people I find really interesting. And so that information is really key. And then also, it allows you to have really interesting conversations around the office, and people start to look at you and say, oh, you've read that book too? And so now you begin to look like you're on their level in that way as well. Getting involved with the fundraising community outside the workplace, I think, is also important, because you're creating credibility, not just within your office, but outside your office. Because what we know is that fundraisers tend to know other fundraisers. So if they bump into other people that they know in the industry, they may say, oh yeah, I know Nick. He's on my AFP committee, and he's a real go-getter. We really like him. I bet he's really great in your organization. So it starts to show other people within your community and also in your office that you're taking this really seriously, and also that you're in fundraising for the long haul. Don't be afraid to show your credentials. I've always had this conversation with fundraisers about the CFRE, the ACFRE, master's degree programs, and I think credentials are important. I think it's a way for us as fundraisers to differentiate ourselves and say that we've gone above and beyond to make sure that we are credible within our industry. If you went to a doctor and they didn't have an MD, what would you think as a patient? If you went to go work with an attorney and they didn't have a JD, what would you think? So why don't we take the same level of seriousness with our own credentials within our industry? And so I think this is extremely important. So beyond that, let's start looking at the map for your career. Now, career planning is really important, because we saw earlier that 81% of the individuals that responded to the survey had said that they were only looking to do their career plans about 5 years out. So it's important for us to really know, where you are now. So what is your fundraising experience? What have you done to this point? What is it that you have done really well? Maybe even take an audit of yourself and think, okay, so I've done major giving, I've done annual giving, maybe I've done some social media campaigns, and really take a stock of what you've done. What's missing? I think this is really key, especially as you're looking forward to the places that you want to go. So start to look at to say, what's missing in my career that I need? A lot of people say that they really want to do more planned giving strategies. So what is it that you can do to start building plan giving strategies, even in your own office, even in your own career? Opportunities for new experience outside of the job. I think this is really key for young professionals, because a lot of the times you talk about experiences that you need to maybe move up into management. And so when you're managing a team, or you're managing a program, or you're managing a variety of other things, you need to have a certain level of skill set. And some of that skill set is working on budgets, some of that's managing people, some of it's project management. And those skills can really be obtained outside of just the office. I mean, think about the times that you've worked on nonprofit committees, worked on boards, worked on industry committees, and how you can get experiences out of those. So like, for example, as Tony said earlier, I'm the chair of AFP's Next Generation Committee, and it's taught me a lot about managing volunteers from around the country, managing budgets, managing the Google Drive with a variety of other people to get projects done. So there are some skill sets you start to learn. Now, they may not be the thing that gets you your next job, but you can start getting those experiences and telling that story. And then lastly, credentials. You're seeing more and more where organizations, where if you're going on to that next job at a different place, they substitute masters for CFRE and experience. So how can a CFRE or other credentials help support your work as you move forward? The other part that's really important when looking at your career is finding strategic mentors. A good mentor helps you learn the business. They allow you to understand what's happening because they've already been in your shoes, and they can provide great career advice. And I think that's really important, and it goes on to building your own network as well, because mentors are going to be key to your success. And having a good mentor, having a good couple mentors, good 3 mentors. Right now, I think I'm up to about 4 mentors that I keep in touch with on a regular basis. And all these people can really help you learn different parts of the business. And that's why it's key. And there's a lot of times where your mentors give you advice that you would have never thought before, but because they read the tea leaves and the conversation that they've had with you, they know exactly what you need to manage or navigate a certain situation. So we developed this idea called the Mentoring Action Plan. And I find this really fascinating. You're going to notice when we go through it that it sounds a lot like relationship building strategies, but that's what it's like to have a mentor, is really building those relationships. So evaluate your career goals. What is it that you want to do within your career? What is it that you want to be within your career? And then find that aspirational mentor. So for me, for example, at one point I said, well, I want to go work in a job where I can be a manager within fundraising. So I reached out to a vice president of a local university that I had met before and had a conversation with them. And then I had some ideas about, maybe I'd want to be a director of plan giving. And so I reached out to someone who is a director of plan giving and learned from them, finding that person, your aspirational mentor. Asking for a meeting. So I think this is a really easy one, but you have to make the ask. And if you're not willing to ask for the meeting, then maybe you're not ready for a mentor yet. But you should really know that this is the key steps in moving forward. Prepare for the meeting. So it's like thinking about those visits with discovery prospects. You want to prepare for the meeting so that you have an agenda in mind of what you want to accomplish. Now, I'm not telling you to actually create an agenda, print it off, and sit down with your potential mentor and have a conversation, but just be prepared of what you want to get out of this meeting. And then meet your potential mentor. It's really important that you have the meeting, you sit down and have the conversation. So how do you make the most of your first meeting with this person? Again, coming with an agenda in mind, I think, is critical. So what is it that you want to accomplish in this meeting? So what do you want to get out of this conversation? Do you want to have a better understanding of what their day-to-day operation is? Do you want to have a better understanding of what it took for them to get where they are now? Do you want to know what they read every day or every month, or how many books they read a year, what books they're reading? What are those things that you want to get out of the conversation? And I think this is critical. What should your potential mentor get out of this conversation? So I really see mentoring as a two-way street, where really the value is in both directions. So how do you create that value for your mentor as well? And a lot of the times the value is just get together with your mentor and them having the opportunity to help a young professional move on in their career. If it feels right, ask for another meeting. This is the first meeting that you just want to kind of see what the relationship's like, see if you really get along with the individual, because if they're going to be a mentor, you're going to have a lot of meetings moving forward. So you want to make sure that there's someone who you really trust, you get along with, and feel like you can get advice from. And lastly, pay the bill. So people always laugh when I tell them to pay the bill, but part of the reason is in my opinion, you're showing that you have skin in the game. Now, here's the other tip with pay the bill. If you're meeting with a mentor for the first time, meet them for a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is a couple bucks. It's very easy to buy. Don't go to lunch and pay the bill. And for God's sakes, don't go to dinner and pay the bill. So, and most of the time what I found is if you're having a mentoring conversation, the other person will probably offer to pay for the coffee. Honestly, most of the time they're writing it off because it could be a recruitment expense. But it's one of those things that at least showing that you have skin in the game is a great first step to building that mentor relationship. So one of the things that you should also consider is how do you maximize your network? So the mentors aren't the only things that can help you do that. So say this is you and you're getting ready to maximize your network within the fundraising industry to grow as a professional. And you have your mentors who are close to you. These are your close professional relationships that provide you advice and may also help you navigate your career. But there's another group that I call advocates. And the advocates are the next group of professional contacts that help you really make some career moves. So I have a lot of advocates throughout the country where I've talked to them about what my aspirations are, what I want to accomplish in my career. And they've helped connect me with other people to have conversations about maybe whatever that next step in my career may be. Now, the thing I find really great about advocates is that I also, as a young professional, act as an advocate for certain people. So I've, like I said, there's some people around the country that I work with who I may connect young professionals with them because they're doing recruiting, or there's other young professionals that I know that really want to get a new experience. So I begin to connect them with other advocates and advocate for them for their own career growth. So I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just your mentors that can help support your network and your growth, but it's also your advocates. So developing your career plan. These are just a couple last steps that you really need to consider. What do I want to be when I grow up? What are the things that you really want to do? I ask myself this every day. I think to myself, well, what is it that I want to do when I grow into my career? Work with mentors to create a career strategy plan. I think this is key. It's like I said before, what you measure, you treasure. So have a career strategy plan that you can measure and move forward. Where do you want to be at the end of this year? Where do you want to be at the end of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? Have that plan. Inform your advocate of your career goals, so that's building that network outside. So how can you not only work on the plan with the mentors so they know what the plan is, but also work with your advocates to understand your career goals? And then work and trust your plan. I mean, so many times we go into creating plans for a variety of things, whether it's your career, whether it's a annual fundraising program, and then we create the plan and we put it on a shelf and then we never look at it again. So this is where you really need to trust your career plan and then work your career plan.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick. We'd like to open the conversation up for questions. In the spirit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're sensitive to the fact that the millennial experience for our attendees may be different due to race, gender identity, and sexual orientation. If this is you, we definitely want to hear about those situations and experiences. So please submit any questions or comments you have via the chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Meanwhile, we'll get started with questions we've received so far. So thank you all so much that have already submitted some great questions for us. Nick, here's a really, really good one. Are you ready?
I am.
Excellent. As one of the only millennials in my office, I am often tasked with the grunt work, especially as it relates to technology, databases, Excel, those types of programs. What are some tips and or things I can say to help change this mindset, especially since this has become routine?
That's a great question. So I think there's a couple components to that question. Number one, it's always tough to get pushed onto the grunt work, especially being a young professional. So the first thing I would say is be an all-star at it. So be amazing, accomplish things early and accomplish things often. That way you can show that you have a lot of wins. The other part I would say is if they're giving you those different technology items, start to create strategies. Show them that you're really thinking in depthly about these projects, and also show them that you're not just a grunt person who just sits there and answers technology problems. If you start to show that you can be an all-star and then you have innovative ideas and plans, and then you start to execute those plans, you'll start to see that the projects you get are different. And I get this a lot even in my own job now. So we've been doing a variety of things. I work in a major gift role. And so we've had conversations about, well, how do you do really good cultivation for donors? And so just recently I walked into my boss's office and we're talking about making a significant ask to a individual. And we were talking about how the president of the organization is going to go down to see them in the near future to begin these conversations. And I told him, I said, you know what? I got a great plan already in place for this before this conversation happens. I am going to create this video that highlights some of the really awesome things in the college that this donor finds interesting. We're going to send it to him and we're going to have it wrapped up and ready to go. And it will land a week before the president goes down to see this individual. And my boss looked at me, her eyes just lighted up and said, wait, you thought about that? And I said, yeah, I have a plan. I have a strategy. I want to be innovative with the way that I cultivate donors moving forward. So it's things like that that catch people off guard. And even if you're getting grunt work, but you can show innovation and you can show that you really can accomplish things, then you can also start asking about how you can take on more responsibilities and grow. Those things I think are key to getting out of that grunt work rut.
Great. That's an awesome response. Thanks, Nick. So another great question that just came in from one of our attendees. What do you say to donors or faculty members who ask you how old you are?
Sorry. I have this long-running joke, and just to give you guys an inside scoop. I tell people the reason I grew a beard was because I wanted people to think that I'm 5 years older than I actually am. So it's tough, right? Because, you know, it's one of those things where age can be a barrier, and we talked about that a little bit. And so when I take on these conversations, usually I'm just a little coy with them, and I say, well, how old do you think I am? You know, and I kind of play the game with them a little bit. And then, you know, we eventually get to the idea, yeah, so full disclosure, I tell you, I'm 31 years old, and I tell people, you know, I'm 31. But I think when we start to have conversations, people are like, wow, you're only 31? And I'm like, yeah, you never guessed that I've already been a vice president of a nonprofit. I've raised tens of millions of dollars for organizations around the country. And I'm involved with national things like the AFP International Next Generation Committee. And so it starts to change the conversation a little bit. Also, I feel like when you start to talk to them and older generations start to understand that you can have an informed conversation with them, it starts to change the whole dynamic of the conversation. Because, yeah, I mean, even being 31, a lot of the donors that I work with are in their 50s, 60s. I'm clearly the age of their kids. Some of them in the 70s and 80s. I'm clearly the age of their grandkids. So I just, you know, have a little fun with it. And I even tell the beard story sometimes. So, you know, I feel like let's not make this where it has to be a barrier. Let's have a little fun with it. And then let me show you that age is just a number, and show you how that I'm a real professional. And then when I'm talking about, I really know what I'm talking about.
Excellent. I'm sure a lot of us relate to age is just a number. That's for sure. We have another great comment I'd like to share. This is from one of our attendees. I recently attended a professional development meeting where an additional level of professional support was presented, in addition to mentors and advocates. It was champions. These are the people who will champion your career and take an active role in helping you get to the next step. I thought this was helpful, and I felt that I needed more information on how to find a champion.
Yeah, that's great. Champions, very similar to the advocates that I show. And
Yes.
yeah, I think that's great. You really have to have those people who are in your corner and really can support what you're doing. And, that's the beauty of a network. No number's the right number. So get as many people involved in your career, in your own knowledge base that you can. Because, it's like they say, the people that you surround yourself with are the people you start becoming. So how do you get those really great people that can surround you?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Another great question. How can you find things to relate to donors with when you're closer in age to their children or grandchildren?
That's a good one. So I would say really know who you are as a person. I read this great article once. There was a woman, and I forget her name, but she was the person who really launched the fundraising, I believe, at NYU. And one of the pieces of advice that she had in the article was be interesting. And so I've really taken that to heart because, here's an example. So I go to meetings all the time. I have the College of Engineering. I'm not an engineer. I was a journalism major. And so I meet a variety of people, and you really have to know how to connect with both spouses when you have conversations. So I'm a big sports guy. I grew up in the Cleveland area, so I'm a struggling Cleveland Browns fan, not as of late, but an Indians fan, a Cavs fan. But in the same token, I also saw RITE when they went on their anniversary tour. I went to Hamilton. I have kids, so there's a lot of kids things that I do. So there's a lot of things in my life that I do because I embrace it, and it becomes fascinating conversation that I can relate to with donors. I also travel, both for work and for fun. So when people tell me about some of the trips they've been on, I'm able to connect too because I've been to some of those places. And even if I haven't been there, I may say something like, oh yeah, I've been to, this part of the East Coast that sounds very similar to where you're describing. Here, let me tell you a little bit about it and tell me if I'm right. And so I find ways to relate with them. And those are all general topics. And depending on who it is, there may be other things. I think reading the news is important. So if you know what's going on in the news, you can have conversations. Don't get political unless you're a political organization, then that would make sense. But there's ways to really stay on top of things that are going on in just popular culture that span beyond just being a young professional versus an older person.
Excellent. And I know from my experience, if I can interject just quickly, a lot of times when I step into an office with a potential donor, I'll quickly scan the room and look for pictures or books on a shelf, something that I might be able to connect with where I can, start engaging a conversation about something that I saw that we might have, some mutual connection on or around.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Some other great questions. Let's see here. What association should I join as a millennial to expand my network?
So I'm a big fan of AFP. AFP is the largest fundraising professional organization around the world. I've gotten a lot of experience from them both locally and internationally. That's a great one, just because if you're able to network with the people locally within your community and then get involved in international committees. I presented at the international conference a few times. I think those are really important. I think that also if there's a group that's specific to your organization, so there's CASE, the Council of Support of Higher Education. That's a good one if you're in a higher education institution. There's the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy, AHP. So if you're a healthcare professional, but some of them are also, I was in the United Way network for a while. And so I networked with a lot of United Way professionals in my state, in my region, in the country. So that's a good one. I think those are all, you should all take a part of those. The YNPN group is really good, or YPNP group is really good. And I think that there's others that are also, we have a young professional organization in my area. It's called EPIC. This is through the Chamber of Commerce. So how do you get involved in those as well? And there's other ones too. Like you can get involved in things like Kiwanis and Rotary and Exchange. I think you got to figure out though, there's only so much time in the day. And if you're going to spend time doing something like these other organizations, which one do you feel most comfortable with? And which one do you think you're going to go get the most bang for your buck on? So I would take a look at those organizations. And there may be others that I haven't mentioned, but those would be a good starting point.
Excellent. And kind of along the same lines, if as a millennial, if I'm interested in joining a board of directors for an organization, what skill sets do you think I should emphasize so that I'm attractive to the board?
Yeah, I think you really have to take a look. So here's one of the things I tell people. I personally if I join a board, I don't want to do fundraising. And so that's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because that would be the skill set that I would bring. But I don't do it for two reasons. Number one, I think there's an ethical line with working with donors as a volunteer and then working with donors in a professional setting. So you have to be careful of that. The other part too is I want a different range of experiences. So usually I've had conversations with organizations and just said, hey, I've been around the block. I've done these things. I have some organizational and management skills that I've acquired over time. I'd love to get involved with your group. And sometimes the route to the board may be through another committee. So for a long time, or for a while, I was on the Health Community Solutions team for United Way of Greater Toledo. It then grew into me being on the chair of that group, and then grew into me being on the chair of their community board. So those sort of things I think are really important, but it's hard to start really on going the board just right away. So you may have to take that individual step in between to say, get on committee, understand the organization, understand how you can be involved and what strengths you bring, and then grow those. Because the beauty about being a fundraiser, you should be a fantastic communicator, you should be organized, and you should have the idea about what messaging can really help support an organization's mission. So if you have those things, you can bring a lot of value to an organization, especially a smaller one who may not have those items in mind.
Great. And then our last question. So with multi-generational offices, have you heard from any other millennials? Has there been any conflict with like personal style and clothing?
Yeah, so this is always one that's interesting. I think you really have to know the culture of the office when you take on a job, because it's tough. I mean, look, I think it's tough just showing up and making sure that you're professional all the time. Not that I can't do it, but making sure you're staying to the culture. One of the things that I always have conversations with, especially millennials that are women, is that really make, they have a lot of things that they're thinking about when they're going to the workplace and being professional. And so, it's one of those things about understanding the culture. Don't wear flip-flops unless flip-flops are allowed. I always joke, like, I don't wear cargo shorts to work, but there are a lot of times where, like right now, I'm at the office and we're not a tie organization. So, not having a tie is okay, but I have a jacket. So what are those things that are really important to your office and what's really important to your supervisor? Because I hate to say it this way, but your supervisor may view professional dress a lot different than someone else. I think the actual thing that's been really interesting for young professionals is the way that the view of body art tattoos has really changed. And I think that this is something that we're seeing more frequently and that's become more accepted, that may not have been accepted even 10 years ago when I started fundraising. So, those are a variety of different things. I think just be smart, understand your culture, understand your supervisor. And if you can do those things, I think you'll be okay. But yeah, it's one of those that you go into one office and it's one way, you go to another office and it's completely different. So there's not one size fits all answer. You just got to know your organization.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for your great questions. And of course, Nick, thank you for your great responses. And let's see here. So we want to keep the conversation going. If you have additional questions, please let us know on social media, tag us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and use the hashtag SIPWebinar hashtag to reach out to us. If you'd like to connect with Nick, his contact information is available to you here on the screen. You will also receive this information when you get the slide deck and a follow-up email in the next few days. So Nick, one last big takeaway for our attendees today.
Yeah, so the one big thing that I think is that don't listen to the news. Young professionals are being successful around the country, doing fantastic things, changing industries, helping do really innovative stuff within our world. So don't look at those articles that you see in your popular business magazines and buy into some of the negative rhetoric that's out there. You guys are all awesome and you do really good. And thanks again for having me today.
Of course, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing such great information with all of our attendees today. So don't miss our next webinar on February 20th, and that is part of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series, Engaging Black Philanthropists, Principles and Traditions that Lead to Meaningful Relationships with Black Donors and Black Communities. So make sure you register today for that awesome webinar on February 20th. And so in closing, thank you to our audience for your time and great questions. To help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure we are providing value to our audience, please take a few minutes to complete our survey. And with that, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for all that you do to better the communities in which we live, work, and play. See you on February 20th.